Good afternoon and welcome. This webinar is entitled Individualized Vocational Rehabilitation Services and Young Adults with Autism Spectrum Disorder, a Case Study. I'm Mark Peterson with the Virginia Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services, and I'm joined by Erik Smith of Didlake, a supported employment manager and provider who also is here in Virginia and works closely with our VR counselors. In this webinar, which is one in a series of 3 provided by VCU on best practices services in working with individuals with autism, we'll look at how individualizing or making our VR services specific to the needs to be addressed for successful employment. I'll begin with how that's generally done from the vocational rehab counselor's perspective, and then Erik will illustrate individualizing services while helping a young man named Brian to master his employment. What are some typical vocational rehabilitation services provided through a counselor? In the case example that you'll soon learn about, even in their initial meeting, the intake, career exploration began. And this exploration and discussion with Brian and his team was individualized or tailored to what Brian and his team brought to the table for consideration. In the initial session, the counselor provided counseling and guidance in exploring Brian's strengths and needs. More specific information can be gained from a vocational evaluation or, in Brian's example, a situational assessment helped Brian himself to get a real-time, real employment experience. As more information is collected and understood about the person's individualized strengths and needs, the team begins to assemble a picture of supports and training Brian will profit from to become successfully employed and maintain that employment. The counselor and Brian form this into a plan, or IPE, Individualized Plan for Employment. Although the tools needed may vary to succeed, often in Virginia there is a partnership with an employment specialist like Erik, who conducts further supported employment services. Additionally, many individuals with autism benefit from assistive technology and transportation training and supports, and you'll see further specific examples of those individualized services shortly with Brian and Erik. The VR counselor can also provide work-related clothing, such as uniforms, and non-skid or steel-toed shoes if necessary to perform the work safely. Having a benefits consultation early on also prevents any surprises from the impact of earnings on benefits the person is already receiving. And finally, the counselor coordinates information and referral, as well as partnering with community supports and resources like the local Community Services Board and Center for Independent Living for important ancillary services that complement the employment services provided by VR. Typical barriers to successfully transitioning from high school to employment for persons with autism that the counselor, Brian, and the team identified through the plan and work together to address with matching services are limited work experience, processing and adjusting to multiple life changes going from school to work, the need for routine and sameness complicated by life's changes as one exits high school. In other words, changes to much of what was familiar and routine, and sensory or fine motor issues, and one of the hallmarks of ASD, difficulties with social communication. You can see here that we've included expressive and receptive communication skills, understanding workplace culture and expectations, demonstrating appropriate workplace interactions, challenges with soft skills necessary at work, like interviewing, greeting other people, and problem solving, especially in teamwork. The ways that the VR team directly improves employment outcomes are that it assists the job seeker to uncover their own interests, strengths, and needs. It matches just what the person needs to get, master, and maintain that job, and also matches the resources necessary to achieving that employment goal. The VR counselor is a key person in coordinating the type, timing, and quality of vocational rehabilitative services necessary for choosing, getting, and keeping employment. They do this, as Erik will now describe, in concert with families, persons with ASD, employment specialists, and other partners, for example, assistive technology specialists. In addition, you'll next see every emphasis in helping Brian engage with coworkers that will be natural supports to maintain his employment and independence. Erik?
Hey everyone, my name is Erik Smith. I'm an employment specialist and program manager with Didlake Incorporated, an employment services organization. Today I'm going to be presenting a case study on Brian, who received Individualized Vocational Rehabilitative Services from his local DARS office. Just to let you know a little bit about Brian, he is a high school student in a regional special ed program that serves individuals on the autism spectrum. Brian also participated in a local project search program, which is a 9-month vocational program training young adults on work skills at a local hospital. Brian is a great guy. He loves listening to music and watching videos online. He's a big fan of SpongeBob and gets a lot of enjoyment out of watching and quoting things that he's seen in the SpongeBob videos. Brian has a lot of strengths. He's very independent. He actually prefers to be able to work alone. Once he knows his tasks, he enjoys completing them independently. He's a very good reader. He's very routine oriented and is okay with the repetition of tasks. He was really motivated to get a job and he wanted to work. Enjoys earning money and being able to spend his money on the things that he wants to buy. He has a vibrant personality. He's fun to interact with, has a great sense of humor, and really, once you get to know him, is very endearing. And he also has a strong support network. His family is very involved in his life and is deeply committed to his success. Brian also has some needs, though. Brian has some sensory issues with noise and visual input. He can have some challenges with transitions. Going into new places and experiencing new locations can be challenging for him. He has very intense areas of interest. Like I mentioned, SpongeBob is one of those, and he spends a lot of time investing in those areas of interest. Dealing with change can be a struggle for him when we mentioned transitioning, but also new tasks, new routines. Those kind of things can provide difficulty for him. He also is very dependent on that schedule. He's very rigid when it comes to wanting to complete tasks in order of his routine. And he also has limited problem-solving skills, so asking for help, figuring out how to deal with problems. Brian often gets stuck when he doesn't know what to do next. So Brian, like we mentioned, was the recipient of a Individualized Vocational Rehabilitative Services. Those services included an intensive situational assessment and job development period that happened during the time he was with Project Search. While participating in that program, Brian's team was able to really assess and gain a firm grasp on Brian's strengths and Brian's needs, and able to really pursue employment for him that was a good match and fit his needs. And that intensive situational assessment period is important for anybody who may be dealing with the challenges that come with autism. And through that process, we were able to really plug him into an employment opportunity that was a good fit for him. Once Brian was able to obtain employment, he actually participated in an extended placement and training period in order to stabilize him and maintain his employment. That extended period of place and train also included post-employment services, which are available through DARS, and we worked really hard during that time to make sure that Brian was stable on the job, that he was learning and mastering the skills and the tasks that he needed to be successful on the job. During that extensive time period for placement and training, Brian actually was a recipient of several voc rehab opportunities, including an assistive technology evaluation and the development of accommodations to address fine motor difficulties. Specifically, Brian was tasked with shredding sensitive information, and once the shredder filled up, Brian would have to remove a very full bag of shredding and tie that bag off. And so we were able to do an AT evaluation for Brian to figure out a functional way for him to be able to accomplish that task. We actually ended up being able to clip the bag as opposed to tying the bag and help Brian be successful with that task. Brian also was instructed during that placement and training period on how to use his cell phone independently and appropriately. When Brian needed assistance when he was waiting either before or after work, we helped develop a script for him to be able to know who to call, when to call, and what to say when he used his cell phone. Transportation training and problem solving was another area where we invested through the vocational rehabilitation program, invested in Brian's success. He was using the local paratransit that was available to him, but because of those limited problem solving skills, when the ride was late or the ride went to the wrong entrance, Brian needed support in recognizing what to do in those situations, as well as when it was raining outside, or if he needed to let somebody know that he needed help. A big part of Brian's success on the job was the ongoing collaborations and communication with Brian's team. Not just the employer, but also his DARS counselor, his family, working together to deal with the challenges that came with his employment. We spent a lot of time planning for changes in job duties and responsibilities. As Brian became more stable on the job, it became apparent that he could accomplish more tasks. And so adding tasks to his task list, also changing certain tasks to reflect what the need of the employer was, all of those things were a part of that collaborative effort to make sure that Brian was successful on the job. With the employer, we also had the opportunity to offer training on disability awareness, recognizing Brian as a unique individual and how he expressed himself, how he communicated what he liked and what he didn't like, what his wants and needs were. And so we worked very closely with the employer in order to offer those opportunities to train them on how to best support Brian on the job. We also worked with the team to develop visual supports to increase his independence. The employer identified areas where Brian was getting stuck or having challenges, and we worked very closely with the employer to come up with those visuals, but also not just for the vocational rehab team to support him in that way, but also for the employer to understand that they had the ability to develop visual supports as well that would increase his independence. And then implementing behavioral interventions to improve interactions with coworkers. Brian needed help to understand what the culture of the workplace was. And so we used social stories that we reviewed with Brian at work on the job, both the employment specialist, his mentor on the job, and his family at home, to help him understand how he could better become a part of his workplace and understand the culture of his workplace. We also had the opportunity to go through behavioral rehearsals paired with visual cues in order to really help Brian grasp what it meant to be a part of his workplace and help him be successful. And so collaboratively, we worked together as a team in order to really make sure that all these pieces were in place at each step of the employment process through that placement and training period. Every part of it was collaborative. There was a strong effort obviously on Brian's part to be successful on the job, the DARS team, and providing the support and resources that they had available to them through that individualized vocational rehabilitation plan, as well as his family and the employer, all really worked together to help him be successful on the job and deal with the challenges that he had. So when we consider that collaborative effort on Brian's behalf and his participation in an individualized vocational rehabilitative program that takes into account his unique personality, his unique strengths, his unique needs, we've been able to see Brian achieve his goals on the job. That intensive assessment, job development, and placement and training period has empowered Brian to maintain his employment, competitive integrated employment, for the past 2 years. He's become a valuable contributor to his employer, along with his own self-confidence and his own self-esteem. He has been able to achieve a lot on the job. Brian has become more independent. He's accomplishing more and more tasks. Brian is able to transition into settings that he previously had difficulty with. Brian has been able to problem solve on his own and come up with solutions to situations he might run into. But not only that, he has increased the efficiency within the organization. Since Brian has come on board with his organization, in the last 2 years, they have not had to hire a shredding company in order to deal with their shredding. Brian has been able to take care of, on his own, the shredding needs of his organization without them having to go outside and bring somebody in, saving them money, saving them time. He's also positively impacted the workplace. And as he has become a part of that family, Brian has developed meaningful relationships with his coworkers who have embraced him and who he is and benefit from his presence, his sense of humor, his unique personality. And so all the way around, both from a bottom line perspective, but also from a workplace culture perspective, Brian's presence has made a big difference for his employer and for him personally. As I mentioned before, Brian has continued to get better on the job. Every month, Brian is adding new tasks and responsibilities to his task list. And every time that happens, it's requiring less and less job coach intervention. His interactions with his coworkers have become much more frequent and positive, and he's initiating greetings and contact with his coworkers. He's adjusted to schedules and changes in staff more fluidly. As the seasons at his workplace change, there are often changes in the number of staff and also new staff coming in and out of his workplace, as well as his actual physical schedule for work changes with the seasons, and he has been able to adjust to those changes successfully and work through, again, this process of support with his individualized plan that have empowered him to make those changes. And of course, building, as I mentioned earlier, building more problem-solving skills, identifying where Brian needs support and then empowering him to get the support he needs and to initiate that problem-solving process on his own. So we want to connect the dots here on how an individualized vocational rehabilitative plan has worked for Brian. Brian experienced many of the common barriers that young adults with autism spectrum disorder experience. And so going through the process of developing and implementing an individualized plan for Brian has allowed him to address those barriers and to successfully overcome them to be successful on the job. He has participated in the core of vocational rehabilitative services offered through DARS, and he's utilized many of the additional resources that are available through his local vocational rehabilitation provider. The partnership that exists between the vocational rehabilitative provider and the community partners really worked beautifully together to be collaborative in supporting Brian's needs, helping to achieve a successful employment outcome. And this case study for Brian really provides a clear example of how important an individualized vocational rehabilitation plan is for a young adult with ASD. Considering the challenges that are present with ASD, considering the uniqueness of each individual, really Brian's case study highlights how all of these different pieces can come together in order to support an individual with ASD and see them be successful, not only on the job, but in life as well, to achieve their personal goals, to achieve independence, and to become a part of their community and work in their community in really meaningful ways that have helped him and his family really experience the fullness of the benefits of being employed in the community. So I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen to our case study on Brian, and I appreciate you listening to me talk about how individualized vocational rehabilitation plans can impact the lives of young adults with ASD. Thanks.